Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Friday, June 27th, 2025, and you're listening to Alex's News. The weather in Riverside today is looking warm and pleasant. Expect a high of 90.7 degrees Fahrenheit, dropping to a comfortable low of 64.0 degrees overnight. So, if your plans involve spending time outdoors, be sure to find some shade and keep hydrated throughout the day. Coming up on Alex's News, we'll be looking into why several states are voicing significant concerns about the future of federal disaster relief funding and what that could mean for their communities. And we'll also examine the current congressional debate that's focused on your state tax deductions and how that might impact you. All these stories and more coming up right after the break. Stay tuned. We begin this morning with a story sending ripples of concern across the country. State and local emergency management agencies are grappling with unprecedented uncertainty as billions of dollars in crucial federal funding, traditionally provided by the Federal Emergency Management Agency known as FEMA, appear to be drying up under new administration policies. Joining us to shed light on this perilous path forward is our reporter Ethan. Ethan, this sounds like a serious situation. What exactly is causing this widespread anxiety among states?
Grace, you hit the nail on the head. The immediate alarm bells truly started ringing because FEMA, inexplicably, failed to open applications for a vast array of grants. These aren't just any grants. They are vital for basic emergency management operations and staffing, and according to reporting from ProPublica, FEMA blew past the statutory mid-May deadline without explanation. This delay, described by ProPublica as having, quote, little precedent, end quote, has left states in a funding limbo. To add insult to injury, FEMA abruptly rescinded a different grant program aimed at reducing natural hazard risks just this past April, pulling back hundreds of millions of dollars already pledged. ProPublica also reported that the agency quietly withdrew a notice for states to apply for $600 million in flood mitigation grants. It's a real dry spell for disaster funds.
That's a significant amount of money and a lot of instability. Is this just poor management? Or is there a bigger policy shift at play here?
It definitely appears to be a deliberate policy shift, Grace. These actions are set against the backdrop of President Donald Trump's stated desire to significantly overhaul, if not completely eliminate, the 46-year-old agency. President Trump has publicly stated his intention to, quote, phase out, end quote, FEMA after the 2025 hurricane season, aiming to shift more responsibility for disaster response to the state level and distribute less federal money more directly. This means potentially bypassing FEMA's established programs, according to ProPublica and AP News. His vision even extends to proposals for distributing future disaster recovery funds directly from the president's office, bypassing FEMA's traditional role, as noted by KRDO, KVIA, and SAN.com.
So he wants to change FEMA's structure from the top down. Have there been any concrete steps taken to implement this vision?
Absolutely, Grace. The administration's approach became much more concrete with the establishment of the FEMA Review Council through an executive order. This council is co-chaired by Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. Secretary Noem has been particularly vocal, stating her belief that FEMA, quote, fundamentally needs to go away as it exists, end quote, a position echoed in reporting by KRDO, KVIA, and SAN.com. What's more, ProPublica revealed that on June 11th, just 16 days ago, DHS Secretary Kristi Noem began requiring her personal review of all FEMA grants above $100,000. This move, which current and former FEMA employees fear will, quote, slow the vast grants apparatus to a crawl, end quote, is ostensibly for, quote, rooting out waste, fraud, abuse, end quote, according to DHS. This new review protocol, coupled with the cancellation of the multi-billion-dollar Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities, or BRIC, program, designed to help states protect against natural disasters, has created significant uncertainty and operational challenges. That's been detailed by KRDO, KVIA, SAN.com, EDF.org, and NJLM.org.
It sounds like the agency itself is experiencing quite a shakeup, not just its funding. What's the situation like internally at FEMA?
Internally, it's been a turbulent time, Grace. FEMA has experienced significant leadership upheaval, including its second acting administrator in 5 months. They've seen the resignation of its director coordinating national disaster response, and the departure or firing of more than a dozen senior leaders, plus an, quote, unknown mass, end quote, of full-time workers as reported by ProPublica. Compounding this, reports indicate a projected loss of close to 30% of FEMA's staff by the end of this year, which is about 6 months from now. This contributes to a massive, quote, brain drain, end quote, meaning experienced professionals are leaving, weakening the agency's ability to coordinate federal response efforts, according to KRDO, KVIA, SAN.com, and govzxec.com. It's like the agency is losing its head, or at least a big part of its brain.
That's incredibly concerning, especially with hurricane season underway. How are states, which rely so heavily on these funds, coping with this uncertainty?
Grace, for many states, this isn't just a budget crunch, it's an existential threat to their emergency preparedness. Some states are heavily dependent on FEMA grants for their emergency management budgets. For instance, ProPublica detailed that Wyoming State Emergency Agency receives over 90% of its operating budget from federal funds. North Carolina's Emergency Management Agency relies on federal grants for 82% of its budget. Texas also has significant federal reliance, with approximately 75% of its emergency management budget stemming from federal grants, according to KCENTV.com and the International Fire and Safety Journal. Virginia and South Carolina also show high reliance, at around 70% and 61% respectively, ProPublica notes. These grants fund crucial activities such as staffing, training, and equipment, especially in rural, low-income counties with modest tax bases, where, as ProPublica found, a single emergency manager's salary might be half paid by a FEMA grant.
So these proposed changes could really pull the rug out from under states, leaving them unprepared for future catastrophes.
Precisely. Lynn Budd of the National Emergency Management Association, or NEMA, warns that the uncertainty and potential cuts could lead to a severe, quote, lack of preparedness, a lack of coordination, training, and partnerships, end quote, ultimately hindering effective disaster response, according to ProPublica. To put the financial burden into perspective, an analysis by the Urban Institute found that proposed changes to the per capita damage threshold for a presidential disaster declaration would have disqualified 71% of disaster events between 2008 and 2024 from receiving public assistance. This could shift approximately $41 billion in public assistance spending to state and local governments over a 16-year period, as reported by KRDO, KVIA, SAN.com, and the Urban Institute. Politico points out that this could place an untenable financial burden on states, many of which would struggle to set aside sufficient funds to cover the costs of increasingly frequent and expensive climate-related disasters. It's a recipe for disaster, if you will.
It sounds like the administration is trying to reframe the entire federal role in disaster response.
That's the core of it, Grace. The administration's intent was further underscored by an executive order in March 2025 aimed at shifting primary responsibility for disaster preparedness from the federal government to state and local entities, directing a review of infrastructure and risk policies, and calling for a national risk register, as reported by the International Fire and Safety Journal, Inside Climate News, gov1.com, mdcounties.org, and ucs.org. And, on his first day in office, President Trump also rescinded an executive order mandating stricter building and land use requirements for federally funded projects in floodplains. While framed as reducing administrative burdens, ucs.org and harvard.edu note, this move raises concerns about long-term climate resilience.
Ethan, thank you for breaking down this complex and critical situation for us. This is story 1 of 2. We'll be right back after the break. Welcome back. We turn now to a legislative tug-of-war in Washington, D.C., one that could hit millions of Californians right in their wallets. It involves something called the state and local tax, or SALT, deduction cap. For more on this financial friction, we go to our reporter, Chloe. Chloe, what exactly is this salt cap, and why is it causing such a stir, especially here in California?
Grace, it is quite the puzzle for many taxpayers. The SALT deduction allows you to deduct state and local taxes from your federal taxable income. A $10,000 cap was imposed in 2017. This disproportionately affects residents in high-tax states like California, New York, and New Jersey. According to Cal Matters and LAist, about 2.8 million Californians, or 15% of all tax filers in the state, claimed the SALT deduction in 2022.
So it is definitely a pressing issue for many Californians. Congress is currently debating its future as the cap is set to expire at the end of this year, which is about 187 days from today. What is being proposed, especially given the bill known as the, quote, one big beautiful bill, end quote?
That is right, Grace. The U.S. House of Representatives passed its version on May 22, 2025. Their proposal is to raise the SALT deduction cap to $40,000, but only for taxpayers with annual incomes of $500,000 or less. This aims to provide relief to the, quote, working rich, end quote, as defined by Dennis Ventry of UC Davis School of Law. In contrast, the U.S. Senate's draft, released in June 2025, aims to maintain the current $10,000 cap. Alan Auerbach, a professor at UC Berkeley, attributes this to fewer Republican senators from high-tax states.
A stark difference there between the chambers. Now, I understand states have developed a workaround for this cap. What is that, and how is Congress looking to address it?
Many states, including California, devised the Pass-Through Entity Tax, or PTET. This mechanism, sanctioned by the IRS in 2020, allows businesses like S corporations to pay state income taxes at the entity level. This payment is then deductible as a business expense on federal returns, effectively bypassing the individual $10,000 cap.
So businesses found a way to work around it. How are the House and Senate proposing to deal with these PTETs?
They are quite different. The House bill would significantly curtail the PTET for, quote, specified service trades or businesses, end quote, or SSTBs, like law and healthcare firms, making their state tax payments again subject to the individual SALT cap. However, it would preserve the PTET for other businesses. Darian Shansky, a UC Davis law professor, finds this problematic. The Senate's draft proposes a universal cap on the PTET deduction, set at the greater of $50,000 or 50% of the eligible deduction, applying to all pass-through businesses.
Why are some arguing for targeting these specific service businesses?
It is largely about revenue, Grace. Proponents argue eliminating the PTET deduction for SSTBs would generate $73 billion over 10 years, according to the Joint Committee on Taxation. This revenue would partially offset other expensive provisions in the bill, like the $565 billion cost of increasing the SALT cap.
And what are the arguments against targeting them?
Critics, including the American Institute of CPAs, argue it is discriminatory, favoring capital-intensive businesses over labor-intensive service businesses. They contend it would significantly increase the tax burden on vital small and mid-sized SSTBs. Many also call the bill fiscally incoherent, saying it has a, quote, math problem, end quote, because the $73 billion only covers about 13% of the broader tax cuts.
Fascinating. And are there any nuances for different types of pass-through entities, like S corporations versus partnerships?
Absolutely. S corporations face stricter pro rata rules, complicating PTET elections, especially for multi-state operations. Partnerships, conversely, offer more flexibility in their agreements for allocating deductions and credits, allowing for more equitable distribution of PTET benefits among partners, which is a bit of a tax tightrope walk for many businesses.
It certainly sounds like a complex financial puzzle. Chloe, with the cap expiring at the end of the year, what is the road ahead for this, quote, one big beautiful bill, end quote?
The future is quite uncertain, Grace. The deep divisions between the House and Senate, and even within the Republican Party itself, make a compromise difficult. The ultimate form of this bill, which will be hammered out in a conference committee, will profoundly impact the financial planning for millions of Californians navigating life in a high-cost, high-tax state.
Chloe, thank you for breaking down what is truly a Byzantine battle in Congress. It is clear that the final outcome will have significant ramifications for our viewers. We really appreciate your insights.
My pleasure, Grace.
And for our viewers, the information shared today draws upon reporting from several sources. These include CalMatters, LAist, AskFrost.com, CurrentFederalTaxDevelopments.com, and ThomsonReuters.com. Additional sources are Cooley.com, RopesGray.com, NYC.gov, TaxLawCenter.org, and GreenTraderTax.com. We also reference BHFS.com, FAS.org, Idaho.gov, BrickerGraydon.com, and EvergreenSmallBusiness.com. Further reporting comes from EquitableGrowth.org, Congress.gov, EY.com, Columbia.edu, and ProScourTaxTalks.com. Other contributors include BipartisanPolicy.org, RSMUS.com, CalcPA.org, Mundag.com, and Cadwalader.com. This information also uses ClarkNewberg.com, Anshan.com, EDBailey.com, WithOM.com, and VSCPA.com. More sources are s-corp.org, tx.cpa, kitses.com, thelawbuck.com, and taxfoundation.org. We also utilized troutcpa.com, mints.com, ddkcpas.com, kiplinger.com, and crfb.org. Further reporting comes from itep.org, smartasset.com, forbes.com, forvismazars.us, and ufl.edu. Finally, we consulted bakertilly.com, bdo.com, debavoise.com, cbsnews.com, taxpolicycenter.org, and brookings.edu. We will continue to follow this story closely. Here are some other headlines. First up, California's justice system is facing a constitutional crisis, and it's not being taken down verbatim. A critical shortage of court reporters has led to a staggering 1.7 million hearings in civil, family law, and probate cases going without an official record in the past 2 years. This is creating what some call a two-tier system, where justice might lose its appeal for those who can't afford to hire a private reporter, a service costing thousands of dollars a day. In response, some courts, like Los Angeles Superior, are independently moving to allow electronic recording when a stenographer isn't available. However, court reporter unions are putting up a fierce fight, arguing that technology isn't a reliable substitute, and lobbying instead for bills that would recruit more human reporters. The entire contentious debate has now been served to the state Supreme Court for a final ruling. Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, a series of military-style immigration raids by a coalition of federal agencies, including ICE, the FBI, and the DEA, has ignited a firestorm. The operations, targeting locations like the Fashion District and day labor centers, used armored vehicles and drones to detain dozens of individuals, many reportedly without judicial warrants. Protests erupted almost immediately, leading to clashes with LAPD officers who used tear gas and rubber bullets to disperse crowds. The situation escalated when President Trump deployed active-duty Marines and the National Guard, a move Governor Newsom is now challenging in court. Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass criticized the raids for targeting hardworking people, a sentiment bolstered by data showing that nearly 70% of those arrested in the region had no criminal convictions. And finally, it seems some university spending isn't making the grade. A new report shows California's colleges are spending millions on plagiarism and AI detection software from the company Turnitin, despite major questions about its accuracy and privacy. The CSU system alone has spent over $6 million since 2019. But an investigation found the company appears to be cheating on its own pricing, with some schools like UC Irvine paying more than triple what others, like UC Berkeley, pay per student for the exact same service. The technology itself is being called worse than useless by some experts, after it erroneously flagged innocent students' work as being generated by AI. Citing these concerns, Cal Poly recently canceled its contract. Critics say instead of paying a high price for flawed tech that stores student papers indefinitely, schools should invest in teaching educators how to adapt to the new age of artificial intelligence. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King with Claude Sonnet 4.0, Gemini Pro 2.5, Gemini Flash 2.5, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.